Tonight we are not entering a century, a kingdom, or a famous reign. Tonight we are entering a room, and not a remarkable one. Just a small, dark space where history rarely looks and almost never listens. Before you drift any deeper, if this quiet helps you feel safe tonight, you're welcome to stay with us. Subscribing softly keeps this place gentle and lets these nights continue. Now, rest. A room where survival is practiced quietly without speeches or witnesses, where people wake not because they are hopeful, but because waking is the only habit that keeps everything from collapsing. And if this feels intimate, that is because medieval life was not epic. It was crowded, repetitive, and stubbornly alive in ways that never asked permission to continue. The room wakes before you do. It always does. The cold reaches awareness first, seeping into straw, into wool, into joints that have already decided they are older than the calendar suggests. Darkness still holds the space because night here is not softened by candles or glass or distant lights. It is complete, heavy, and practical, the kind of darkness that assumes you will navigate by memory and accept bruises as part of the arrangement. You do not stretch luxuriously because stretching wastes warmth. You do not linger because lingering costs energy, and energy is not something you treat casually when every day is already overdrawn. This room is everything: kitchen, bedroom, workplace, storage, shelter, and sometimes hospital. It smells of smoke that never fully leaves because there is no chimney. Clever enough to negotiate with weather, it smells of bodies that are washed infrequently, not because of ignorance, but because water must be carried, heated, rationed, and justified. It smells of animals because animals live here too, not as pets, but as insurance policies with legs. Privacy does not exist in this room, only proximity. And if you learn anything early in life, it is how to ignore sounds that would disturb you in another world. Sleep here is not rest, it is maintenance. A pause long enough to prevent collapse, but short enough to keep anxiety intact. You sleep lightly because fire can start, sickness can turn, a child can cry, a pig can panic, or the weather can decide to rearrange your plans without notice. The idea of uninterrupted sleep is charming in the abstract, like the idea of leisure or control, concepts discussed elsewhere by people with walls thick enough to support them. Morning arrives quietly, without ceremony, no bell, no clock, just a subtle shift in cold and sound, a rooster somewhere behaving as if it has authority. You accept this as sufficient. Timekeeping here is approximate and surprisingly accurate, measured by hunger, light, and obligation rather than minutes. You do not wake alone, no one ever does. Bodies stir together, movements negotiated silently, the room coming online like a machine that was never turned off, only slowed. The floor is earth, compacted by generations of footsteps and decisions. It is cold and honest, and does not pretend to be forgiving. Shoes wait nearby, thin, compromised, better than nothing, which is the standard by which most things are judged. You dress without mirrors because you do not need to see yourself to know what you look like. Tired is not a style choice here. It is the default state, maintained carefully so it does not slide into uselessness. The fire is coaxed back to life if there is fuel to spare. Yesterday's embers persuaded to remember their purpose. Smoke fills the room again, and no one complains because smoke is better than dark, and dark is worse than discomfort. Children exist in this room not as abstract futures, but as present logistics, mouths, bodies, warmth, risk, and hope all tangled together. They sleep when they can, wake when they must, and learn early that space is shared and silence is optional. There is no dramatic suffering in this room, no single overwhelming moment that defines the day. Instead, there is accumulation, small discomforts layered until they become normal, aches cataloged but not discussed, hunger acknowledged but negotiated with, fear present but managed quietly so it does not interfere with function. If someone complains too loudly, it is not because they are weak, but because something has gone wrong, enough to deserve attention. This room teaches lessons efficiently, that nothing belongs entirely to you, that survival is collaborative even when it feels lonely, that comfort is temporary and therefore not something to grow attached to, and that endurance does not announce itself. It just shows up again tomorrow, looking slightly worse and still willing to work. You do not think of this as misery. Misery implies comparison, and comparison requires alternatives you have never seen. When the door opens and cold air enters, it does not feel like leaving home. It feels like continuing the same condition under a larger sky. The room releases you into work and waits patiently for your return, unchanged, unbothered, ready to absorb another day of living without comment. This is where life resets every night and begins again every morning, quietly linking one day to the next without asking whether it is worth it. Everything that follows, the hunger, the labor, the fear, the authority, the illness, the small joys that arrive without warning, they all begin here in this room. Because before fields and lords and seasons, there is this space where people learn how to keep going. And once you understand this room, the rest of medieval life stops looking dramatic and starts looking inevitable, which is exactly how it felt to the people living it. Age measured in survival, not years. When you live in a room like that long enough, time stops behaving the way it was described by people who own clocks. Age does not arrive politely at round numbers. It seeps in through joints, through breath, through the way you hesitate before lifting something you lifted easily last year. Here, age is not counted forward, it is worn down, measured not by birthdays, but by what no longer recovers by mourning. You are not young in the way stories describe youth. You are functional, which is different. Your body works today, therefore today you are acceptable, tomorrow is a separate negotiation. At 28, you are not considered early in life, you are considered established, tested, already carrying the visible weight of years that would sound exaggerated elsewhere. People do not say you look tired, they say you look steady, which is the highest compliment available. Your father did not reach this age, neither did many of the men you grew up watching bend over the same fields. Their absence is not dramatic, it is structural. Their places filled quietly, tools passed on without ceremony, lives ending without punctuation marks. Death here is not shocking. It is administrative, something that rearranges labor and leaves the rest of the day intact. Your mother is alive, which already places her into a category that invites observation, not admiration exactly, but curiosity. People glance a little longer, listen more carefully when she speaks, as if longevity itself might contain instructions. She is not called old because old implies rest. She is called worn, which implies usefulness maintained longer than expected. She remembers things others do not because they happened long ago, but because the people who experienced them did not survive long enough to remember alongside her. Age in this place is not something you plan for. It is something that happens to you while you are busy preventing worse outcomes. There is no idea of retirement, no gentle transition into reflection. You work until you cannot, and when you cannot, your value shifts abruptly from producer to dependent. A dangerous change in a system that barely tolerates inefficiency. To grow old is to become lighter in muscle and heavier in memory, and neither feeds anyone. Children learn this early without being taught. They notice which adults move slower, which ones sit down more often, which names stop appearing in daily routines, and they understand without explanation that time here is not generous. A child who reaches 5 is treated differently, not with celebration, but with cautious investment, tools sized smaller, expectations adjusted upward, survival having proven something worth extending effort toward. There is no adolescence in the modern sense. There is a brief overlap where bodies are strong but not yet exhausted, where speed still compensates for poor judgment. That window is narrow and closes without warning. By the time you realize it has closed, you are already adapting your movements to avoid injury rather than to achieve speed. Pain is not a signal of emergency. It is a background confirmation that you are still participating. In another world, age might bring authority. Here, authority belongs to roles, not years. The person who controls resources controls decisions, and that position rarely waits for wisdom to catch up. Elders are consulted not because they are wise, but because they remember what happened last time something failed. Memory replaces theory. Experience replaces optimism. If someone survived 3 winters like this one, their opinion carries weight, regardless of their posture. The idea of growing old together as a family is appealing but unrealistic. Generations overlap briefly, just enough to transfer habits, not enough to offer comfort. Grandparents know grandchildren by touch more than conversation. Their stories are interrupted by coughing, by fatigue, by the practical need to lie down. Love exists, but it is squeezed into the margins between responsibilities, expressed through action rather than reassurance. Time itself feels compressed. Seasons repeat faster than reflection allows. Planting follows harvest without pause. The year is not a journey but a loop, and you age not by moving forward but by circling the same demands with diminishing reserves. Each year you are not a new version of yourself. You are a thinner version doing the same work. People speak of those who lived long as if they had cheated something, as if survival beyond expectation were a clever trick rather than an accumulation of luck and restraint. The old man in the village, the one who claims to be 50, is treated like a story that walks around, his age repeated more often than his name, his body a reminder that continuation is possible but not reproducible. No one asks how he did it because no one expects the answer to help. Age also changes how fear behaves. Younger people fear sudden things, cuts, falls, punishment. Older people fear gradual ones, weakness, slowness, the day when getting up costs more than it returns. Injury in youth is dramatic. Injury later is final. Everyone knows this. No one says it aloud. You lift carefully, not because you are cautious by nature, but because caution has become the most efficient form of hope available. The passage of time is visible in small adjustments, stools placed closer to the fire, tasks rearranged to conserve motion, children taking on weight earlier than they should, parents allowing it because resistance would cost energy they cannot spare. Age here is collaborative, shared across bodies, the young borrowing strength from the old borrowing speed from the young, the system balancing itself until it cannot. What no one discusses is the arithmetic beneath it all, the unspoken understanding that each additional year survived increases the risk of becoming a liability, and that love does not eliminate this calculation, it only complicates it. Families prepare quietly for loss, without naming it, tools organized so someone else can use them, knowledge distributed before memory fails, life simplified in advance of its own narrowing. You do not think of your age often, there is no benefit to it. You think of capacity. Can you work today? Can you walk home tonight? Can you eat enough to do this again tomorrow? These questions matter more than numbers, and they create a different sense of self, one rooted in present ability rather than future expectation. This is how time shapes people before it teaches them anything else, by insisting that survival comes first and reflection second, by turning age into a condition rather than a milestone. When people from elsewhere speak of living fast and dying young, they imagine intensity. Here, dying young is ordinary, and living long is an inconvenience. Everyone pretends not to notice. And this understanding settles quietly into the body, not as despair, but as realism. You work while you can, you rest when forced, you accept help without pride and give it without ceremony, because age here is not a personal journey. It is a shared resource being depleted together. This is what you carry with you when hunger enters the conversation, because once you understand how quickly the body spends itself, food stops being pleasure and becomes timing, rationing, and risk management. The next lesson always arrives on an empty stomach. Hunger as a daily calculation. Hunger does not arrive suddenly in this world. It seeps in quietly, the way cold does, unnoticed at first, accepted before it is named. By the time it announces itself clearly, it has already been making decisions on your behalf for days. Hunger here is not a dramatic absence, it is a narrowing, a gradual reduction of options until only one or two remain, and neither of them are comfortable. You wake already negotiating with it, not asking whether you will eat, but how much you can afford to eat without causing trouble later. Food is not a pleasure to be enjoyed. It is a resource to be stretched, diluted, postponed. A loaf of bread is not a meal. It is a sequence of future mornings disguised as something solid. Every bite carries a calculation that does not feel mathematical but instinctive, learned so early that it no longer requires conscious thought. This immediately, it adapts by lowering expectations, by dulling sensations that would otherwise distract from work. Hunger becomes a background sound, like the smoke in the room or the ache in the back, noticeable only when it changes pitch. People who live with enough food imagine hunger as pain. People who live with hunger know it as discipline. Meals are thin not because of ignorance, but because thickness is expensive. A pot of food must serve many purposes, feed many mouths, last longer than it should. Water is added not to deceive, but to survive. Vegetables repeat themselves because repetition is predictable and predictability is valuable. Meat appears rarely enough to become a memory rather than a habit, spoken of in the past tense, recalled with unnecessary detail because memory is free, even when food is not. Hunger structures the day more reliably than bells or prayers. You work because hunger demands it. You rest because hunger will not improve without recovery. You sleep because hunger will return, regardless of what you do. Children learn this rhythm quickly, not through instruction but through observation. They notice which adults eat last, which bowls are filled less generously, which conversations stop when supplies are mentioned. Sharing food is not charity, it is strategy. A household that hoards will not survive isolation. A household that shares selectively increases its chances when scarcity becomes communal. This is not generosity. It is mathematics performed with trust instead of numbers. Everyone knows who eats well and who eats poorly, but no one says it directly because naming imbalance invites resentment, and resentment costs energy. Hunger also rewires memory. You remember meals that would seem insignificant elsewhere, a piece of meat months ago, a fuller bowl during a festival, bread that was softer than usual. These memories do not comfort, they instruct. They remind you what the body is capable of feeling so you can recognize when something is truly wrong. The most dangerous aspect of hunger is not the emptiness itself, but the way it forces choices to arrive earlier than expected. Do you eat more today and risk less tomorrow, or eat less now and hope the body will cooperate? Do you feed the child fully and reduce your own portion, or maintain balance and accept slower growth? These decisions are not discussed philosophically. They are made quietly, repeatedly, with no guarantee that the correct answer exists. Hunger sharpens awareness while dulling ambition. Long-term planning becomes abstract, replaced by short sequences of survival. The future shrinks to manageable increments, the next meal, the next harvest, the next season. This is not ignorance of time, it is a rational response to uncertainty. You do not imagine abundance, because imagination without access becomes frustration. There is a particular irony in how hunger coexists with labor. The body requires food to work, but work consumes the energy that food barely provides. This creates a loop that never resolves, only sustains itself at the edge of adequacy. You eat to work and work to eat, neither activity producing enough excess to break the cycle. Efficiency becomes survival. Waste becomes sin, long before morality enters the conversation. Children grow thinner than expected. Adults grow leaner than intended, not because they are starving, but because growth is negotiated downward. The body learns to function on less, but this adaptation has limits, invisible until crossed. When illness appears, hunger reveals its hidden cost. Recovery takes longer, strength returns partially, scars linger where resilience once lived. Festivals interrupt hunger briefly, not enough to eliminate it, but enough to remind everyone what fullness feels like. These moments are celebrated not because they solve anything, but because they prove that hunger is not permanent, only persistent. Afterwards, the return to thin meals feels sharper, not because conditions worsened, but because contrast reawakens sensation. Hunger also polices behavior. Risk becomes less attractive when reserves are low, rebellion requires calories, travel requires surplus. Even curiosity costs energy. Hunger encourages compliance not through fear, but through fatigue. People do not challenge systems they cannot afford to disrupt. This is not submission, it is accounting. The language around food reflects this. People do not say they are hungry, they say food is running low. They do not say they need more, they say they will manage. Words are chosen to avoid panic because panic accelerates consumption. without increasing supply. Calm is conserved like salt. Over time, hunger becomes integrated into identity. You do not imagine yourself as someone who lacks. You imagine yourself as someone who manages. Pride forms around endurance rather than comfort. Eating enough becomes a success rather than a baseline. This is how hunger stops being an emergency and becomes a condition. But hunger never fully disappears into routine. It waits, it listens, it counts mistakes, a poor harvest, an injury, a lost animal, and the margin collapses. What was manageable becomes urgent without changing its shape. The same thin meals now carry different weight. This is why hunger never exists alone. It is always accompanied by work. Hunger pushes people into the fields earlier, keeps them there longer, encourages labor beyond safe limits. Food does not simply sustain work, it demands it. The hungrier the body becomes, the more it must be used. By the end of each day, hunger has accomplished its task, not by starving people into submission, but by guiding their decisions quietly, persistently, until the next step feels inevitable. And when hunger finally loosens its grip, even briefly, it does so only to remind you that it will return unchanged, patient, ready to continue the conversation tomorrow. Work that begins before belief. Work begins before belief in this world, before prayer, before intention, before anything resembling choice. You do not decide to work, you arrive inside it the way you arrive inside weather, already moving, already required to participate. By the time anyone tells you what you are supposed to do, your body has already started doing it. The day does not wait for certainty. Muscles engage before thought finishes forming. Hands reach for tools they know better than words. This is not motivation, it is momentum carried forward from yesterday and the day before that. Stopping would require more energy than continuing. And energy is not something you spend on rebellion when hunger is still negotiating terms. Work here is not a task, it is a condition. You do not enter and exit it cleanly. It spills across hours, across bodies, across generations. Children are not introduced to work, they grow into it naturally, small hands copying movements before understanding purpose. There is no moment when labor begins, only a moment when it becomes unavoidable. Belief arrives later, shaped around work rather than the other way around. People do not work because they believe it is good. They believe it is good because they have always worked. Meaning is applied afterward, like plaster over stone, smoothing edges so the structure feels intentional. The rhythm of labor becomes explanation enough. The body from part 2 recognizes this immediately. It knows that rest is conditional and earned, not because someone said so, but because rest without work threatens tomorrow. Pain becomes background information, cataloged but rarely acted upon. You learn which pain can be ignored and which pain demands adjustment, not for comfort but for efficiency. There is a particular silence to work done without expectation of improvement. You do not imagine progress, you imagine continuity. The goal is not to make things better, but to prevent them from becoming worse. This changes how effort feels. You do not push for excellence, you aim for adequacy, repeated indefinitely. Fields do not care who works them, they accept labor without gratitude. Tools do not improve through loyalty, they wear down alongside their owners. Work here does not build toward reward, it holds collapse at bay. This is why it feels endless without being dramatic, why exhaustion does not arrive in waves but settles permanently. Work also organizes time more reliably than any authority. Days are divided by light and fatigue, weeks by soreness, seasons by repetition. You know when planting begins not by calendar, but by the way soil responds to pressure. You know when harvest approaches by the ache in shoulders that has been waiting for this moment all year. There is no distinction between working for yourself and working for others that feels meaningful in the body. Labor spent on the Lord's land and labor spent on your own feel the same in the spine. Only the consequences differ, and consequences are felt later, often too late to change decisions already made. This is how obligation becomes internal. No one needs to watch constantly. No one needs to threaten every moment. Hunger already did the work of enforcement in part 3. Work simply follows as its physical expression. People show up because not showing up creates problems they cannot afford to solve. You learn early that visible effort matters more than outcome. Being seen working protects you from suspicion, from extra demands, from questions that cost time. Working harder than necessary is sometimes safer than working efficiently. Inefficiency can be hidden, absence cannot. Fatigue accumulates quietly. There is no dramatic collapse, just slower movements, shorter breaths, fewer unnecessary words. You learn to pace yourself not to preserve joy, but to preserve function. The body becomes a managed resource like food, stretched, rationed, protected from catastrophic failure, rather than optimized. Work reshapes social relationships. Conversations happen while moving. Cooperation forms without discussion. Help is given because refusing would create debt. Community emerges not from affection, but from synchronized exhaustion. You recognize others by posture and rhythm before you recognize faces. The idea of refusing work exists only in stories told about other places. Here, refusal is not an act of defiance. It is a logistical problem that affects more people than the refuser. The cost is distributed outward, making refusal socially expensive in ways punishment never needs to be. Even moments of rest are framed by work. Sitting is allowed when it prepares you to stand again. Eating is tolerated because it fuels effort. Sleep is acceptable because it resets capacity. Anything that does not contribute to future labor must justify itself carefully. Belief tries to catch up to this reality. Words are arranged to explain why work matters, why endurance is virtuous, why suffering produces character. These explanations are useful not because they are true, but because they reduce friction. They make repetition tolerable. But beneath belief, work remains unchanged. It does not become lighter because it is justified. It does not shorten because it is accepted. It simply continues, drawing energy from bodies that learned long ago how to give without expecting return. Over time, work erases distinctions between days. Memory organizes itself around seasons rather than events. You remember winters, not years, harvests, not ages. Personal milestones dissolve into collective cycles. Life becomes something you do rather than something that happens to you. This constant labor shapes expectations for authority. Those who do not work visibly are treated with suspicion unless their absence produces results. Power that does not touch the body feels unreal. Respect flows toward effort more easily than toward title. And yet, Work alone does not explain how everything holds together. Labor requires coordination, boundaries, shared rules about who does what and when. The village is not just a collection of workers, it is a system that absorbs individual effort and redistributes survival unevenly but predictably. By the end of each day, work has done what it always does, not solved anything, not improved conditions, but extended existence one more cycle. And as you lie down knowing the same movements will be required tomorrow, you do not ask whether this is fair. Fairness is a luxury concept. You ask only whether your body will comply again. This is how work settles into the bones. Before belief, before explanation, before resistance, becoming the quiet engine that keeps everything else moving long enough to matter. The village as a system, not a community. From the outside, the village looks like a collection of people living close together for convenience or tradition. But from the inside, it behaves more like a system that tolerates people only as long as they perform their function. Affection exists, familiarity exists, but neither is the organizing principle. Survival is. The village does not ask who you are, it asks what you do and whether you continue to do it. Each household appears independent until pressure arrives. When pressure comes, lines of separation dissolve immediately. Food shortages, illness, fire, broken tools, all of these reveal the underlying design. The village absorbs shock by redistributing burden. This redistribution is not fair, but it is consistent, and consistency is more valuable than fairness when collapse is the alternative. Roles form early and harden quickly. Some people carry water, some repair roofs, some manage animals, some remember rules. These roles are not assigned formally, they are discovered through repetition. If you do something well once, you will likely do it again. If you survive doing it many times, it becomes expected. Over time, expectation turns into obligation, without anyone ever announcing the change. This is how identity is produced. You are not defined by personality, but by reliability. Being useful matters more than being liked. People forgive unpleasantness more easily than incompetence. A difficult neighbor who delivers results is tolerated. A kind neighbor who fails to perform becomes a risk. This is not cruelty. It is accounting under pressure. Help circulates constantly but not evenly. Assistance flows toward points of failure that threaten the system as a whole. A sick child is tragic, but a broken mill is dangerous. A widow is unfortunate, but a collapsed bridge is urgent. The village does not lack empathy. It prioritizes consequences. What keeps bread moving matters more than what feels compassionate in isolation. Because of this, generosity looks different than it does in stories. It is quiet, conditional, and strategic. Food is shared not to relieve suffering, but to prevent disruption. Labor is given not to express kindness, but to maintain balance. When someone receives help, they receive it with the understanding that they are now part of a debt network that never quite resets. This network is remembered without records. People know who owes what, not in exact measures, but in impressions that harden over time. You remember who helped when your roof failed. You remember who did not. These memories shape future cooperation more effectively than rules ever could. Reputation becomes currency, and it is remarkably hard to counterfeit. The village watches itself constantly. This watching is not malicious, it is structural. Everyone notices who works, who rests, who struggles, who adapts. Observation replaces enforcement. When someone begins to fail repeatedly, concern appears first, then adjustment, then distance. Exclusion is rare but real, and it does not require accusation. It happens through the gradual withdrawal of assistance until survival becomes unsustainable. Children absorb this logic without instruction. They learn which adults are trusted, which houses are stable, which paths are safe. They learn where food appears reliably and where it disappears quickly. This knowledge becomes instinctive, carried forward into adulthood without ever being named. Conflict exists, but it is usually contained. Open disputes threaten cohesion, and cohesion is expensive to rebuild. Most disagreements are managed through delay, avoidance, or quiet negotiation. Anger that disrupts labor is discouraged. Anger that accompanies labor is tolerated. The difference is practical, not moral. Leadership emerges not from charisma, but from coordination. People who can organize effort without slowing it down become influential. They do not command, they align. Their authority comes from being useful to the system, not from being admired. This makes leadership fragile. If results stop, influence evaporates quickly. The village also maintains boundaries. Outsiders are not rejected automatically, but they are evaluated cautiously. New people represent unknown costs. Until their usefulness is demonstrated, they remain peripheral. Integration requires contribution. Belonging must be earned repeatedly, not declared once. Shared rituals exist, but they function more as synchronization tools than expressions of belief. They align schedules, reset tensions, redistribute food temporarily. Participation signals compliance with the system. Absence raises questions. Meaning is secondary to function. When disaster strikes, the village contracts. Non-essential tasks vanish. Labor is redirected aggressively. Individual preferences disappear. The system narrows its focus to core survival functions. Once stability returns, variety slowly re-emerges. This elasticity keeps the village alive while preserving the illusion of normalcy. It is important to understand that the village does not care about justice in the abstract. It cares about continuity. People who fail due to bad luck may receive help longer than people who fail due to perceived irresponsibility. The distinction is subjective but powerful. Blame is not assigned through investigation, but through pattern recognition. This system produces a particular kind of loneliness. You are always surrounded, yet never fully insulated. Your life is visible, but not deeply known. Others see your function more clearly than your fears. Privacy exists physically, but not socially. Your struggles are monitored, not necessarily understood. At the same time, the system offers a kind of safety that individuals cannot create alone. Total collapse is rare because redundancy exists. Skills overlap. Knowledge is distributed. When one part fails, another compensates, at least temporarily. This creates resilience without comfort. By the end of the day, when people return to their rooms and their families, the village remains active in the background, recalculating, remembering, adjusting. It does not sleep. It waits. Tomorrow it will require the same performances again, and it will remember who delivers them. This is why personal freedom feels limited but not entirely absent. You can choose how you perform your role, not whether you have one. You can adjust within boundaries, not remove them. The system allows variation but not refusal. Understanding this makes authority easier to explain. Power does not arrive as violence first. It arrives as coordination. It arrives as someone who speaks for the system and claims to represent its needs. Once that voice exists, enforcement becomes easier because compliance has already been rehearsed. The village, then, is not a family, and it is not a collection of strangers. It is a machine built from people who cannot afford to stop moving. It keeps them alive while slowly wearing them down. It offers protection in exchange for participation. It does not promise happiness. It promises continuation. And as long as continuation is the goal, the system works, until something arrives that requires more than coordination, more than memory, more than quiet pressure, until authority becomes concentrated enough to speak not just for the village, but over it. That is when the next layer appears. Not the village watching itself, but someone watching the village. And that is where power stops being informal and starts to feel personal. Authority without presence. Authority does not announce itself loudly in this world. It does not arrive with trumpets or speeches or even consistent visibility. Most of the time, it is not present at all. And yet it shapes decisions, movements, and fears more reliably than any person standing in the square ever could. Authority here works best when it does not need to show its face. You rarely see those who hold power. You feel them instead, in schedules that are not yours, in rules you did not write, in expectations that arrive already settled. Authority lives in timing. It chooses when work must be done, when it must stop, and when it must resume again at a cost. It does not need to watch every hand, because hunger already taught those hands where to be. This kind of power is efficient because it blends into routine. When authority feels distant, people fill the distance with assumption. They imagine consequences more severe than the ones that are actually required. Fear becomes preventative. Obedience becomes proactive. You do not need to be told twice when the first instruction already carried uncertainty. The people closest to authority are not the most powerful. They are the most visible. They are the ones who relay messages, keep records, count days, note absences. They are not architects of the system, but they are its hands and eyes. Their proximity grants them small privileges and constant suspicion. They are resented quietly and obeyed carefully. What makes authority unsettling is not punishment but unpredictability. When rules are clear and enforced consistently, people adapt. When rules shift subtly, when exceptions appear without explanation, compliance becomes anxious. You work not only to meet expectations but to avoid attracting attention. Attention is expensive. Attention invites scrutiny. Scrutiny invites adjustment. Authority also benefits from scarcity. When resources are limited, people compete for favor without realizing they are doing so. Compliance becomes a currency. Being reliable becomes a shield. Being noticed for the wrong reason becomes a liability. The system does not need to reward loyalty openly. It only needs to punish deviation occasionally. Most authority here is exercised through absence. The threat of intervention is more powerful than intervention itself. You hear stories. Someone assigned extra days. Someone fined. Someone denied access. These stories circulate without detail, gaining weight as they move. The truth matters less than the lesson. Authority becomes mythic by not correcting exaggeration. This distance also creates deniability. When hardship arrives, it is framed as necessity rather than decision. Orders are attributed to tradition, to law, to circumstance. No individual appears responsible. This dispersal of blame protects those at the top and exhausts those below. You cannot argue with tradition. You cannot confront circumstance. The system trains people to internalize authority. You begin to monitor yourself. You measure effort, attendance, visibility. You adjust behavior not because someone is watching, but because someone could be. This possibility becomes enough. The most successful authority is the one that teaches people to enforce rules on themselves. Even resentment is managed carefully. Open anger threatens stability. Quiet frustration is safer. Complaints become private, softened, redirected. People grumble to each other but comply publicly. This creates a culture where disagreement exists, but rarely accumulates enough force to disrupt function. Authority also understands the value of routine. Change is introduced slowly, wrapped in familiarity. New demands resemble old ones closely enough to avoid alarm. Additional obligations are framed as temporary, seasonal, necessary. Temporary often becomes permanent. But by the time this is clear, resistance would cost more than compliance. Punishment, when it occurs, is selective. It targets visibility rather than severity. A small infraction performed publicly may be punished more harshly than a larger one done quietly. This reinforces the lesson that the system cares less about justice than about example. People learn to hide mistakes rather than eliminate them. The body responds to authority differently than the mind. Fear tightens movement. It shortens breath. It encourages efficiency over care. You work faster, not better. You avoid asking questions. You choose the safest interpretation of instructions. Over time, this produces a kind of compliance that looks like agreement, but feels like tension held indefinitely. Authority also shapes relationships. People become cautious about association. Helping the wrong person can create risk. Being seen with someone under scrutiny can transfer attention. Solidarity is tested constantly against self-preservation. This does not destroy community, but it reshapes it into something careful and conditional. What is most striking is how ordinary all of this feels. Authority does not disrupt daily life. It blends into it. Days continue. Work continues. Meals remain thin. The system functions precisely because it does not demand emotional investment. It only requires participation. Belief adapts to accommodate this. People tell themselves that authority is necessary, that order prevents chaos, that rules protect everyone. These beliefs may even be true in part. What matters is that they reduce cognitive friction. They allow people to endure constraints without constant internal conflict. There is also humor here, dry and quiet. People joke about rules they follow perfectly. They exaggerate authority figures into caricatures in private. These jokes relieve pressure without challenging structure. Laughter becomes a valve, not a weapon. Authority remains strongest where it is least examined. The fewer times it needs to intervene, the more natural it feels. When it does appear directly, it feels intrusive, almost embarrassing, like seeing the mechanism behind a familiar sound. People lower their eyes, not out of reverence, but out of habit. Over time, authority becomes part of the landscape. It is discussed the way weather is discussed, sometimes favorable, sometimes harsh, rarely personal. You prepare for it rather than confront it. You plan around it rather than against it. This prepares people for larger disruptions without realizing it. When illness spreads, when war demands bodies, when taxes increase, the structure already exists. Orders arrive through familiar channels. Compliance follows familiar patterns. Authority does not need to invent control. It only needs to redirect it. By the end of the day, authority has done its work without appearing. People returned to their rooms, completed their tasks, avoided notice, and adjusted expectations. Nothing dramatic happened. And that is the point. Authority succeeded by remaining background noise. But background noise shapes sleep. It shapes dreams. It shapes the way people imagine tomorrow. It teaches caution where curiosity once lived. It teaches endurance where ambition might have grown. It keeps life predictable enough to continue and constrained enough to remain manageable. This is how power survives in places where open force would be too expensive. It becomes routine, it becomes invisible, it becomes something you account for without thinking, like hunger or fatigue. And once authority reaches that state, it no longer needs presence to be effective. It waits, it observes indirectly, it intervenes rarely. And when it does, everyone notices, not because it is new, but because it briefly steps out of the shadows where it usually prefers to remain. That is the world you carry into the next uncertainty, because authority can manage routine, but it struggles with unpredictability. And unpredictability arrives in the form of sickness, accident, and sudden loss. Things that do not ask permission before breaking the rhythm. When the body betrays the system. Illness does not announce itself politely. It does not wait for permission from schedules or obligations. It does not respect hierarchy, rank, or usefulness. It arrives quietly, often invisibly, and once it does, the careful balance built by routine and authority begins to tremble. Not collapse immediately, just enough to remind everyone how fragile the arrangement truly is. The system assumes bodies will function. It relies on them the way it relies on seasons and gravity. When a body fails, even briefly, the failure ripples outward. One missed day becomes two. Two becomes a week. A week becomes a question no one wants to answer. Illness is dangerous not only because it kills, but because it interrupts predictability. Most sickness begins small. A cough that lingers, a fever that rises and falls, a stiffness that does not loosen by morning. These are ignored at first because ignoring them is cheaper than acknowledging them. There is work to be done, and time does not pause for discomfort. Pain is familiar. Weakness is not. The body is expected to endure. It has always endured. People treat early symptoms as inconveniences rather than warnings. To stop working is to risk everything. To continue working is to hope the body cooperates long enough. Hope becomes a strategy, not an emotion. When illness worsens, explanations multiply. Bad air, damp straw, cold nights, God's will, someone else's fault. The cause matters less than the outcome. The outcome is that a person cannot perform their role, and roles are what keep the system moving. Without them, the machine grinds, slows, and demands adjustment. Care exists, but it is limited. Knowledge is partial. Remedies are inherited rather than tested. Herbs ease pain, not causes. Prayers offer structure to fear, not solutions. Sometimes recovery follows treatment, sometimes it follows no treatment at all. Sometimes nothing follows except silence. This uncertainty is unsettling. Authority depends on predictability. Illness introduces randomness. It creates gaps no rule can fill cleanly. When someone is sick, responsibility shifts awkwardly. Work must be redistributed. Food must be shared differently. Space must be reorganized. Every adjustment carries cost. The sick person becomes a question mark. Will they return to function, or will they become a burden? This question is rarely voiced aloud, but it shapes behavior. Kindness competes with calculation. Compassion is present, but it is measured carefully against survival. Accident operates similarly, but faster. A slip, a fall, a tool handled one moment too carelessly. The body breaks in a way that cannot be hidden or ignored. A broken limb is not a symptom. It is an announcement. The system must respond immediately or not at all. Accidents expose how little margin exists. There are no reserves waiting quietly. There is no safety net that catches bodies when they fall. One injury can remove a person from usefulness permanently. The difference between functioning and failing can be as small as a misstep. Recovery from injury is uncertain and slow. Bones heal crooked. Strength returns unevenly. Pain lingers long after usefulness is expected. The body remembers damage even when the system pretends it does not. People adapt by working around pain rather than through it. Those who cannot adapt fade. They become background. They are present, but no longer central. Their world shrinks to the space they can manage. They are spoken of in the past tense before they are gone. Not out of cruelty, but out of practicality. Illness and accident also reshape fear. People become cautious without becoming safer. They adjust habits, avoid risks, delay tasks. Productivity decreases subtly. Authority notices patterns but struggles to trace causes. You cannot discipline sickness out of existence. The response is often moral framing. Health becomes associated with virtue, illness with failure or impurity. This framing protects the system from blame. If sickness is personal weakness, the structure remains innocent. This belief comforts those still functioning and isolates those who are not. Despite this, care persists. Not formal care, but human care. Someone brings water. Someone sits through the night. Someone watches breathing, counts hours, waits. These acts are quiet and inefficient. They do not scale. They exist outside the system's logic. Illness also alters time. Days blur, nights stretch. The future shrinks to the next hour. Plans dissolve. Authority loses relevance when survival narrows. Orders mean little when the body cannot respond. This is where the system's reach ends. Recovery, when it happens, is gradual and incomplete. The body returns changed. Trust in its reliability weakens. People move more carefully. They rest less easily. Fear lingers longer than pain. The memory of vulnerability settles deep. Some never recover. Their absence is absorbed slowly. At first it is shocking. Then it becomes normal. Work continues. Routines adjust. Life proves adaptable in the most unsettling way. Loss becomes another condition rather than an interruption. Illness reveals what authority cannot control but must accommodate. It shows the system's dependence on bodies it does not protect well. It exposes how much survival relies on luck rather than order. This is uncomfortable knowledge, so it is rarely examined directly. People learn to live with this by not thinking too far ahead. They focus on today, on manageable tasks, on immediate needs. Long-term planning feels naive when the body itself is unpredictable. Humor appears here too, dark and understated. Jokes about pain, about survival, about luck. These jokes acknowledge danger without inviting despair. They keep fear at a manageable distance. In time, illness becomes normalized. Everyone expects it eventually. The question is not if, but when and how badly. This expectation shapes choices quietly. People conserve energy. They avoid excess. They endure rather than optimize. Authority adapts by lowering expectations rather than improving conditions. Productivity standards shift subtly. Absences are tolerated unevenly. Exceptions become precedent without being acknowledged as such. The system survives illness not by preventing it, but by absorbing its damage slowly. It loses people. It replaces them. It moves on. This survival is impressive and disturbing at the same time. For individuals, illness changes identity. You are no longer only what you do. You are what you can no longer do. This loss is internal before it is external. It reshapes self-perception long before anyone else notices. Those who witness sickness learn restraint. They learn that effort does not guarantee outcome. They learn that endurance has limits. They learn to accept uncertainty as part of existence rather than an anomaly. This knowledge prepares them for the next disruption, because illness is not the only thing that ignores authority. Fire, famine, and violence wait patiently, and the system that struggles with sickness struggles even more when disruption spreads beyond the body. But for now, the lesson settles quietly. Bodies fail, systems adapt, people endure. Nothing dramatic needs to happen for everything to feel unstable. Sometimes instability arrives coughing softly in the dark. Hunger and the quiet math of survival. Hunger does not feel dramatic at first. It begins as an inconvenience, a delay, a mild irritation that can be postponed with water or routine. It arrives politely, almost apologetically, asking only that you notice it. Most people do not. They have learned that attention costs energy, and energy is already scarce. The first stage of hunger is denial. Meals become smaller without being named as such. Ingredients are stretched. Portions are adjusted quietly. No one announces that there is less. Everyone pretends this is temporary. Temporary is a comforting word. Temporary suggests an end. Hunger becomes dangerous when it turns arithmetic. When food is no longer eaten but calculated. How many mouths? How many days? How much remains? The math is relentless because it does not care about intention. You can be kind and still run out. You can be careful and still miscalculate. Once hunger becomes shared, it changes behavior subtly. People move slower, tempers shorten, decisions become conservative, risks feel heavier, the future shrinks into the next meal. Authority loses some of its grip here, not because it disappears, but because hunger rearranges priorities. The body adapts before the mind does. Fat disappears. Strength follows. Endurance weakens quietly. People learn to work tired. Then they learn to work weak. Eventually they learn to work empty. Each stage feels survivable until it is not. Communal hunger introduces new rules. Food is watched, stores are counted. Sharing becomes deliberate rather than automatic. Generosity does not vanish, but it becomes strategic. People give where it matters most, to children, to the sick, to those whose survival benefits others. This creates hierarchy within scarcity. Not formal hierarchy, but practical. Some lives are preserved more carefully than others. This is not cruelty. It is math again. The system rewards those whose survival maintains function. It mourns others quietly. Authority attempts to manage hunger through regulation, rations, allocations, obligations. These measures create the appearance of control. They rarely create abundance. Hunger persists beneath structure, adapting faster than policy. Markets respond unpredictably. Prices shift. Credit becomes dangerous. Debt grows teeth. Borrowing food is borrowing time with interest. People avoid it until they cannot. By then, the cost is already high. Hunger also reshapes trust. People watch each other more closely, not out of malice, but necessity. Accusations rise without words. Suspicions form silently. Everyone knows that desperation changes behavior. Despite this, community does not collapse immediately. It bends. Shared meals become rituals of reassurance. Thin soups are eaten together to preserve the feeling of fullness. Conversation fills space food once occupied. Laughter becomes louder than hunger briefly. Children experience hunger differently. They accept it more easily at first. They adapt faster. This makes it more frightening. Adults notice how quickly children learn not to ask. That silence lingers. Hunger alters memory. People remember meals vividly. Past abundance becomes exaggerated. Stories of better years circulate. These stories comfort and frustrate at the same time. They remind everyone that scarcity is not natural, only familiar. Work becomes harder under hunger. Output drops. Mistakes increase. Accidents return. The cycle tightens. Hunger causes weakness. Weakness reduces productivity. Reduced productivity deepens hunger. Breaking this loop requires intervention that rarely arrives in time. Authority responds by demanding more efficiency from less strength. Expectations remain, penalties persist. Hunger is treated as a personal problem rather than a structural one. This protects authority from blame. Religion often enters here as explanation and consolation. Hunger is framed as trial. Endurance becomes virtue. Reward is postponed. This framing helps people survive emotionally, even as their bodies suffer. Humor persists, darker now. Jokes about empty pots, about miraculous meals that never quite appear. Humor acknowledges hunger without surrendering to despair. It buys time. Hunger also produces innovation, new recipes, new substitutions, new ways of extracting calories from unlikely sources. Creativity flourishes under constraint, but creativity cannot create food from nothing. The line between hunger and starvation is not dramatic. It is gradual. It is crossed quietly. People do not wake up starving. They wake up slightly weaker than yesterday. That weakness accumulates. Once starvation begins, time compresses. Days lose distinction. Thoughts narrow. Empathy weakens. The body redirects resources inward. Social bonds strain. Survival becomes individual again. Communal systems fail first under starvation. Cooperation requires energy. When energy disappears, cooperation becomes expensive. People retreat inward, not because they want to, but because they must. Those who survive hunger carry it forward. Even when food returns, habits remain. Hoarding, anxiety, overeating when possible. Hunger leaves marks long after it ends. Authority often claims credit when hunger recedes. It frames recovery as proof of wisdom. The suffering that preceded recovery is reframed as necessary. Necessary is another comforting word. But hunger remembers. Bodies remember. Communities remember. The memory shapes future behavior more reliably than rules ever could. This prepares people for the next disruption, because hunger rarely arrives alone. It brings movement, it brings migration, it brings conflict. When food cannot be found where people are, people move. And movement introduces new instability. Borders matter. Ownership matters. Belonging becomes conditional. Hunger does not respect boundaries, but authority does. As hunger spreads, it exposes the limits of local solutions. Sharing cannot scale indefinitely. Storage empties. Patience thins. People begin to look outward. This is where survival shifts again. From endurance to decision, from waiting to acting. Hunger forces choice, and choice carries consequence. The arithmetic never stops. It only changes variables. Fewer people, less food, different land, different risks. Hunger follows until something breaks or changes. By the end of hunger, nothing returns exactly as it was. Bodies are altered, relationships recalibrated, trust remeasured. The system adapts, but it does not forget, and neither do the people. Hunger teaches lessons that comfort never could. It strips life down to essentials. It clarifies value brutally. When food returns, relief feels unreal. Meals are eaten slowly. Silence returns to the table. Gratitude feels heavy. No one celebrates immediately. They wait to see if abundance stays, because hunger taught them this. Nothing arrives permanently. Everything is temporary, including relief. Movement and the price of leaving. Leaving does not begin with footsteps. It begins with the quiet realization that staying has become more dangerous than moving. This realization rarely arrives all at once. It accumulates slowly through smaller disappointments. A failed harvest, an empty storehouse, a promise that did not come true. By the time movement begins, the decision has already been rehearsed in silence many times. Most people do not want to leave. Leaving is not adventurous here. It is destabilizing. It removes the few certainties people still have. Familiar paths, known faces, predictable risks. Staying may be difficult, but it is at least understood. Leaving introduces unknown variables, and unknown variables feel expensive when survival margins are thin. Movement begins cautiously. People test distance before committing to it. Short trips become longer. Visits extend. Temporary stays quietly become permanent. No one announces migration as a plan. It unfolds as a series of reasonable adjustments that only later appear as departure. The cost of leaving is not paid all at once. It is paid in pieces. You leave behind land first, then tools that are too heavy to carry, then social obligations. Eventually you leave behind identity. Who you were mattered because people recognized it. In a new place, recognition. Those who leave are watched closely. Departure triggers questions, not always spoken. Why them? Why now? Will they return? Should we have left too? Movement creates anxiety among those who remain. It exposes the possibility that staying might be the wrong choice. Authority responds to movement ambivalently. On one hand, it needs bodies. On the other, it understands that forcing immobility too aggressively risks rebellion. So movement is regulated unevenly. Permits appear. Fees arise. Restrictions are justified as order rather than control. Borders matter more when people move. Lines that were once theoretical become real. Crossing them transforms a person from neighbor into outsider. Outsiders are tolerated selectively. Their usefulness is evaluated quickly. Hospitality competes with suspicion. Movement also reorders family structures. Those strong enough to travel go first. Others wait. Sometimes they wait forever. Families split, not because they choose to, but because survival requires prioritization. This fracture is rarely healed completely. The road itself is not neutral. Travel consumes energy without producing it. Every step burns calories that cannot be easily replaced. Exposure increases. Illness spreads faster among the moving than the settled. Accidents are harder to recover from when home is behind you. People underestimate how much movement costs emotionally. Familiar landmarks disappear. Orientation fails. Nights feel louder. Sleep comes harder. The body rests poorly without routine. Fatigue accumulates differently on the road. Despite this, movement continues because hunger does not pause for comfort. People move not toward opportunity, but away from certainty of failure. This distinction matters. Movement is defensive rather than hopeful. When people arrive somewhere new, integration is slow. Locals assess newcomers carefully. Resources are finite. Trust is conditional. Newcomers are given tasks, others avoid. Dangerous work, temporary labor, proof of value before acceptance. This creates a quiet hierarchy among the displaced. Those who arrive earlier claim advantage. Those who arrive later face suspicion from both locals and earlier arrivals. Scarcity reproduces itself socially. Movement also spreads stories. Tales of opportunity grow exaggerated. Failures are downplayed. This narrative imbalance fuels further migration. Hope travels faster than accuracy. Some return. Returning carries its own cost. It confirms failure publicly. It forces explanation. Returnees often find that the place they left has changed. Not enough to be better, just enough to be unfamiliar. They belong nowhere fully now. Authority uses movement strategically. It redirects surplus labor. It drains pressure from crowded areas. It populates frontier zones. Movement becomes policy without being named as such. Those who move feel responsible for the decision even when conditions forced it. Movement changes how people think about ownership. Land feels temporary. Homes feel provisional. Attachment weakens. People learn to travel light emotionally as well as physically. Children experience movement differently. They adapt faster. This is comforting and unsettling. They forget what adults mourn. This forgetting allows survival but erases continuity. Culture thins quietly. Movement also alters morality. Acts once considered theft become survival. Boundaries blur, rules soften. People justify behavior by circumstance. This is not decay. It is adaptation under pressure. The longer movement continues, the more permanent it feels. Temporary camps become settlements. Paths become routes. What was once emergency becomes structure. But structure built on displacement is fragile. It depends on continued movement. When movement slows, tension rises. People compete more directly. Conflicts sharpen. Movement eventually reaches limits, land fills, opportunities saturate, authority tightens controls, the displaced accumulate at edges, camps grow crowded, hygiene deteriorates, illness returns. Those who can no longer move settle reluctantly. Those who cannot settle move again. This oscillation exhausts people faster than hunger ever did. Through all this, people tell themselves stories to cope. They frame movement as choice, as bravery, as destiny. These stories help restore dignity. They make suffering intelligible. In quiet moments, doubt surfaces. Was leaving correct? Was staying worse? There is no answer that does not change with time. Survival decisions are evaluated only by outcome, never by intention. Movement reshapes memory. The past becomes simplified. The future remains vague. The present dominates. This narrowing keeps people functional. Eventually, movement produces new forms of belonging, not based on land, but on shared experience. Those who move together trust each other more than those who stayed. Shared displacement becomes identity. This identity is resilient but tired. It carries scars. It anticipates loss. It prepares for departure even when settled. Movement teaches a final lesson. Stability is not natural. It is negotiated constantly. It is temporary. Those who survive learn to treat permanence with caution. As movement slows, people look again to authority. They seek structure, protection, predictability. Authority returns not as enemy, but as relief. Control feels safer than chaos after long uncertainty. This prepares the ground for the next phase, when authority reasserts itself more directly, when order is rebuilt on the bones of movement, when rules tighten in the name of stability. Because after hunger and migration, people want rest. And rest makes them willing to accept limits they once resisted. The return of order and the price of quiet. Order does not arrive as a celebration, it arrives as a sigh. After hunger, after movement, after uncertainty stretched thin enough to fray nerves and memory alike, order feels less like control and more like rest. People do not greet it with enthusiasm. They accept it the way a tired body accepts sleep, without asking too many questions. The promise of order is simple: predictability. Regular meals, even if small. Clear rules, even if strict. Familiar routines, even if exhausting. After the chaos of displacement, chaos loses its appeal. Freedom without stability feels dangerous. Constraint with structure feels survivable. Authority understands this moment well. It does not need to justify itself aggressively. It presents itself as solution rather than imposition. Order is framed as protection. Rules are described as safety. Compliance becomes cooperation by another name. People who resisted authority earlier now seek it quietly, not because their beliefs changed, but because their tolerance for uncertainty collapsed. Stability becomes a priority stronger than fairness. People accept uneven rules if those rules promise continuity. The re-establishment of order happens gradually. Records return, obligations are clarified, schedules reappear, spaces are assigned. Movement is limited again, not all at once, slowly enough to feel reasonable. The language of authority softens. Demands are called requests. Penalties are called corrections. Surveillance is called oversight. These words matter. They reduce friction. They allow people to participate without feeling coerced. Order also relies on memory loss. The details of chaos fade faster than its discomfort. People remember fear more than injustice. They remember exhaustion more than constraint. This selective memory smooths the return of structure. Communities reorganize under order. Hierarchies harden. Roles become fixed again. Those who adapted well during chaos sometimes struggle now. Improvisation is less valuable than compliance. Flexibility gives way to reliability. This transition creates quiet resentment. People who thrived under movement feel constrained. People who suffered feel relieved. Order rewards different traits than chaos did. This reshuffling produces tension without rebellion. Authority reinforces order through ritual, meetings, announcements, markers of time. These rituals reassure. They remind people where they belong. Belonging feels precious after displacement. Rules multiply quietly. Each rule addresses a specific past problem. Together they create density. Navigating daily life requires attention. Mistakes increase. Authority responds with patience at first, then firmness. Punishment returns selectively. Enough to be remembered. Not enough to provoke resistance. The goal is not fear, but habit. Habit outlasts fear. Order also redefines morality. Obedience becomes virtue again. Stability is praised, risk is criticized. Those who challenge rules are framed as threats to communal peace. Peace becomes a powerful argument. People police each other more under order, not aggressively but reflexively. They remind, they report, they correct. Authority benefits from this distributed enforcement. Control becomes social. The body responds positively at first. Regular meals stabilize energy. Predictable schedules improve sleep. Illness decreases briefly. This physical relief reinforces acceptance. The system appears to work. Over time, constraints tighten. Once stability is secured, authority adjusts expectations upward. Productivity demands return. Taxes increase. Obligations expand. Order reveals its cost slowly. People notice but tolerate it. They have learned that disruption is worse. Memory of chaos remains sharp enough to discourage protest. Authority relies on this memory. Order also reshapes aspiration. People aim lower. They prioritize security over improvement. Ambition feels risky. Contentment becomes defensive. Children grow up under restored order differently. They learn rules before improvisation. They internalize boundaries as natural. They do not remember chaos directly. Their obedience feels effortless. This generational shift strengthens authority further. Those who remember disorder feel isolated in their caution. Those who do not remember it trust structure more completely. Humor returns lighter but narrower. Jokes stay within safe boundaries. Irony softens but does not challenge. Laughter is permitted as long as it does not destabilize. Order also produces boredom. Routine dulls urgency. Time stretches evenly. This boredom is safer than fear, but it has its own weight. People feel life narrowing. Some test boundaries quietly. Small disobediences, minor delays. Authority responds inconsistently. Sometimes it ignores, sometimes it corrects. This unpredictability maintains control. Those who cannot adapt to order fade again. The displaced, the injured, the restless. They exist at the margins. Order does not eliminate suffering. It reorganizes it. Over time, people stop questioning why rules exist. They focus on how to comply efficiently. This is the final success of order. When rules feel inevitable, rather than imposed. Authority presents itself as neutral, as necessary, as timeless. It detaches from individuals. Decisions appear structural rather than personal. This abstraction protects those in power. Order also simplifies narratives. History is rewritten gently. Chaos becomes cautionary tale. Authority becomes savior. Complexity disappears. People participate in this narrative because it stabilizes identity. They want to believe suffering had purpose. That order was earned. Yet something remains unsettled, a quiet awareness that stability rests on fragile foundations. That order depends on bodies that can still fail, on harvests that can still collapse, on peace that can still fracture. This awareness does not disappear. It hums beneath routine. It surfaces in dreams, in moments of silence, in the watch between sleeps. People carry contingency quietly. Extra stores, alternative plans, unspoken agreements. Order tolerates this as long as it remains private. Authority senses this too. It balances enforcement with tolerance. Too much pressure risks breaking acceptance. Too little risks drift. The result is a stable tension. Life continues, work continues, people endure, the system functions. Order becomes background again. Invisible, familiar, like authority before it. People stop noticing it most days. This invisibility is its strength. Order no longer needs to argue for itself. It exists because people behave as if it must. The cycle nears completion, from routine to disruption to hunger to movement and back to structure. Each turn leaves marks. Each return feels slightly different. People settle into the restored order with caution. They sleep better, they worry quietly, they plan modestly. They do not celebrate stability. They respect it. Respect born from fatigue rather than loyalty. And in that respect, authority finds its foothold again, not through force, but through relief. What continues after everything ends? When everything finally quiets, not because the danger is gone, but because people have learned how to live beside it, something subtle remains. Not victory, not relief, not even peace in the way stories like to frame it. What remains is continuation. The slow, unremarkable decision to keep going without asking the world for permission. From a distance, historians will compress this era into a summary. They will describe it as bleak, exhausting, joyless, dominated by hardship and constraint. They will not be wrong, but they will miss something important. Inside the experience itself, misery was rarely total. It was fragmented, diluted across time, absorbed into routine until it became survivable precisely because it was incomplete. People did not experience suffering as a constant scream. They experienced it as background noise, a hum that never fully stopped, but also never fully demanded attention. Hunger was not always starvation. Fear was not always panic. Authority was not always cruelty. Everything existed in gradients, and those gradients made endurance possible. Life did not feel heroic. It felt procedural. You woke up because waking up was required. You worked because not working made tomorrow worse. You ate when there was food. You waited when there was not. You adapted without naming adaptation as such. Survival was not an achievement. It was maintenance. What remains after everything ends is not memory in the form of stories. It is memory embedded in behavior, in how people portion food even when there is enough, in how they hesitate before trusting stability, in how they prepare quietly for absence rather than abundance. The body remembers long after circumstances change. Muscles learn caution, hands learn to conserve, the nervous system learns to expect interruption. These lessons do not disappear when order returns. They become part of the person. Authority understands this instinctively. It does not attempt to erase memory. It relies on it. The memory of chaos makes order feel generous, even when it is restrictive. The memory of hunger makes modest meals feel sufficient. The memory of movement makes staying put feel like safety. This is how systems stabilize, not through belief, but through exhaustion, not through persuasion, but through relief. Order arrives not as an ideal, but as a quieter alternative to what came before. People accept it because acceptance costs less than resistance. This is not a moral failure. It is an energy calculation. You only fight when you believe the fight will improve tomorrow. When improvement feels uncertain, endurance wins. What remains is also a narrowing of expectation. Dreams shrink to match available space. Ambitions become practical. Hope is no longer abstract. It is measured in days without disaster, in children who survive winter, in meals that repeat. This narrowing is often mistaken for resignation. It is closer to calibration. People learn what is sustainable and stop asking for more than that. Excess desire becomes dangerous. Contentment becomes defensive. There is irony here, quiet and persistent. The same systems that restrict life also depend entirely on the people they wear down. Authority survives because bodies continue to function. Order persists because individuals absorb its friction privately. Nothing here is balanced. It is merely stable enough. From the outside, medieval life looks unbearably harsh. From the inside, it feels relentlessly ordinary. Most days are not catastrophic. They are just heavy. The heaviness becomes familiar. Familiarity dulls despair. People laugh, but carefully. Humor survives because it releases pressure without demanding change. Jokes stay small. Irony stays private. Laughter becomes another form of endurance. Care also remains, stripped of sentimentality. Care that does not announce itself, care that does not expect gratitude, care that exists because neglect would be worse. Food is shared not because people are generous, but because shared hunger is easier to manage than isolated hunger. Children grow up inside this logic. They do not know it as deprivation. They know it as normal. Authority feels natural. Scarcity feels expected. Stability feels temporary. These assumptions shape them quietly. This is how eras reproduce themselves. Not through teaching, but through atmosphere. Values are inhaled, not explained. When stability finally settles, it does not erase what came before. It covers it. Like fresh soil over old scars, the surface looks calm. Underneath, the marks remain. People comply, but they remember. Not clearly, not consciously, but in posture, in caution, in the way trust is rationed, in the way plans are made with escape routes quietly included. Authority adjusts too. It learns that pushing too hard risks awakening memory. It learns to rule gently when possible, firmly when necessary, always watching for signs of strain. The result is a kind of negotiated quiet. Life continues. Work continues. People endure. The system functions. This quiet is not peace, it is pause. What remains at the end of everything is the understanding that life does not require meaning to continue. It only requires movement, forward, sideways, sometimes just enough to avoid collapse. People did not need to believe in a better future. They only needed to believe that tomorrow would arrive and that they would be required to meet it. That belief was enough. History prefers endings, conclusions, lessons. But real life does not end cleanly. It drifts. It accumulates. It reshapes itself around damage. The people in this world did not defeat misery. They lived alongside it until it lost its ability to surprise them. They did not overcome authority. They learned where it could be ignored safely. They did not escape hunger. They learned how to make hunger quieter. This is not inspirational, it is honest. And it is why these lives lasted as long as they did. When historians move on, when centuries pass and language changes and structures transform, this endurance does not disappear. It changes clothing, it speaks differently, it lives somewhere else, but it continues. It is present whenever people accept less than ideal conditions because rejecting them would cost too much. It is present whenever routine replaces hope, whenever stability is chosen over justice because justice feels unreachable. That is what remains. Not triumph, not tragedy, just people continuing. And if you are listening to this somewhere warm, somewhere safe, somewhere with the luxury of rest, there is a quiet connection here. Not guilt, not comparison, just recognition. Because the instinct to endure has not left us. It has only learned new shapes. Tonight, like them, you close your eyes, not because the world is resolved, but because rest is required. Tomorrow will arrive regardless of preparation. And when it does, you will continue. That is what remains after everything ends. Still breathing, still here. And for now, that is enough.